What if the world of Marvel and Star Wars combined? More on that in a moment. Hey everyone out there, I'm Dan, aka the Comic Concierge, and with today being Star Wars Day, yes, may the 4th be with you all, I thought I'd do a special little fun video, fun exercise, as, Marvel's been doing the Star Wars comics for some time now, and I know when they got the license again after Disney bought, like everything, including Star Wars, people are wondering, like, it's only going to be a matter of time until we see the Marvel Universe and the Star Wars universe combine in some way, maybe in comic book form. However, it hasn't happened yet. Some may say that's a good thing. Some may say, why not? There's opportunity there. And I'm going to lean towards the side of there's at least some fun opportunity with that idea. So with this video, what I'm going to try to do is kind of imagine what some fun crossovers could be if Marvel and Star Wars were to combine. And I'm thinking, of course, with this being a comic book channel, more comic book centered, thinking of like what DC did the last few years when they had their DC characters crossover with the Looney Tunes, for example, where they took two characters that had similar traits, similar characteristics that would make a good story, make a good comic, or maybe ones that would be a little bit oddball. And you got something great like Elmer Fudd and Batman. That was a lot of fun. And there were some few duds in there as well. But with this, I'm just thinking of what is a Star Wars character that would be a fun interaction with a Marvel character. So I'm going to go through a number of matchups that I came up with and see what you think of them and kind of explain why I think it could be a good story and what fun could be had and what joy or maybe what some more emotional beats can be had by some of these matchups as well. So let me know what you think. I hope people enjoy this fun little thing. And again, happy Star Wars Day to everyone, as somehow, we're finding the dangers of puns. What started as a fun pun is now turned into a thing. But hey, you know what? It gives us a good reason to talk about why we love Star Wars. Why not? So let's take a look at a few matchups. And if you see my thumbnail, you're going to guess a few of these, at least two of them. But there's plenty to talk about. So let's start with the obvious up front. And I'm going to talk about two of my favorite characters from both the Marvel Universe and the DC Universe, starting with possibly one of my favorite fictional characters of all time, Captain America. And yes, the original Captain America, Steve Rogers. Like, who would be a good matchup with him? Like, what would be a Star Wars character that you feel like he would be able to, put him in a story and he's not going to be out of his element too much. He'll have some things to talk about. And I think it's kind of obvious when you look at just the landscape of the Star Wars universe. It would make sense to go with, again, some other soldier like Captain Rex, Captain meet Captain. That seems to kind of seem like an easy synergy right there. How, despite the fact that they're kind of put in certain roles that are meant to be designed to be kind of these figurehead roles where they're supposed to embody a certain type of principles based upon the army they're fighting in or the place they're representing, their ideals are really more linked to their brothers or the people they're fighting next to. That's who they really care about. That's the person that they're fighting for, more so than this larger cause. And I think that'd be kind of cool, seeing how they were able to, despite the fact that they are fighting two very different wars. And I think it would make sense to have Captain America in World War II, kind of like that version of Captain America. Like, how would this happen? Like, how would they link into one another? I think that the best way is to not necessarily explain it all that much. Maybe Captain America goes into a Hydra base and somehow there's a portal and he's in the Star Wars universe. Make it as simple and as least complex as possible. The purpose of these stories is not the machinations of like how these people meet. It's just the fact that like they exist in some sort of similar universe and they meet up and go from there. I think you don't want to. It's silly. It's crazy. The getting over lost in the explanation of how, I think, would ruin all the fun. I guess I'll leave that up to the writers who will probably never ever write this. But hey, I can dream maybe. Anyways, going back at their combination though, like looking at how they could relate to one another. I think it'd also be kind of cool that if you had an original matchup with them, like, World War II Captain America, and then kind of Rex in the beginning of the Clone Wars. And then later on, when you get older Captain Rex, who is now turned on the people basically that made him, when he's fighting against the Empire, and as well as Nomad Captain America, when he gives up the rank of Captain America, having them meet again and then talk about like challenge of fighting against the very institution, the very organization that made you, really, where Captain America becomes delusioned by the government. And similarly, so does Captain Rex, because of what's happening. Of clearly, Rex is a little bit more severe, considering the fact that he's literally fighting them, and the Empire is a bit more evil compared to the individuals that Captain America is dealing with, but I think it'd be interesting seeing how they're kind of wrestling through that idea that, they gave up a lot of what was meant to represent who they are, but they felt that, again, going back to their moral code, that is entrenched in them, not based upon what others say, but just what they're able to develop themselves. Despite the fact they were literally engineered to be these specific soldiers for this specific organization, that they were able to, progress past that. So I think there's just a lot of cool combinations of what they can bond over, what they can kind of fight for, and seeing them interact, I think it'd be a lot of fun, seeing them take out stormtroopers together, seeing Captain Rex take out Nazis, whatever it may be. I think there's a lot of cool potential there between two of the best leaders in both of their respective universes. All right, well, let's look over to the other obvious choice when you look at the thumbnail. And, when I grew up in the 90s in the sense of being a huge X-Men fan, and during that time, Wolverine was everything. He was everywhere. Like, if Marvel had the Star Wars license in the 90s, I'm pretty sure they would try to throw Wolverine into the Star Wars universe some way, somehow. He was pretty much put on every book cover that you could do it in. And I think, it would make a lot of sense to, again, have him in a universe like this. Like, what Star Wars character could you tie him to? What would make the most sense? And I think you took someone who's had some pretty longevity of being a really popular character, and maybe a newer character that is rapidly growing in popularity, like the Mandalorian, or Din Djarin, his more proper name. Although I feel like Grogu, like with Grogu, you're always going to call him the Mandalorian, or at least Mando, rather than, where we call Baby Yoda instead of Grogu. Who knows? Ultimately, putting these two characters together, what would be, why put these characters together? What's the benefit of it? Like, what characteristics do they share in common? Where could they bond? Where can they have some conflict? And I think what you look at with Mandalorian or Din and Wolverine or Logan is the fact that both have pretty tragic pasts. Of course, we saw in the Mandalorian just like how he was dealing with the fact that his family was killed by the Separatists, and with Wolverine, of course, his past has both been kind of lost in his memory, and then what has happened has been kind of horrific. He's lost a lot of loved ones, a lot of family. It's been a constant life of trauma in a way. So I think they could kind of share that element, but I think mostly, though, there are two characters that have these harder shells, right? There are these outside characters that are the typical, like, really big tough guy, but when you team him up with another individual, like a kid, make them more like a father figure, you see their softer core come out. With Mandalorian, you have, of course, Baby Yoda or Grogu. With Wolverine, Kitty Pryde, Jubilee. He's been matched up with a lot of individuals throughout his career, just to show that softer side of him. Yes, he has this hard exterior, but despite that, that he's deep down, they're both generally good people, and I think that'd be fun to see them, and see Wolverine protect Baby Yoda could be a lot of fun. And two, we get to see what's stronger, adamantium or Beskar. That'd be a fun debate to have, to see, like, could adamantium cut through the Mandalorian's armor? Maybe not. One of those fun ideas that you can kind of have the geek dream of those conversations we have about which one's better, which one's next. Can Wolverine's claws cut through a lightsaber? Of course, he doesn't have a lightsaber, but maybe you could throw some Jedi in there. Who knows? It's all fun at the end of the day, but I do think it'd be kind of cool. I think this would also probably sell a lot of stuff, because, again, you have a lot of fans of both of these characters. Beyond just the fact that they would probably sell a lot of copies, they very much are in the same archetype. So just seeing how they would probably butt heads very much at the very beginning. Of course, when heroes meet heroes, they're always going to fight, but could they eventually get along? What would that look like? That could be kind of cool too. Again, like having Wolverine in space going on some sort of bounty hunter mission. The Mandalorian often would try to meet up with whoever he could to help him out in certain situations on certain planets. Who better than a mutant with adamantium claws to do just that if he were ever to travel to Earth for whatever reason? All right, now that I talked about the ones you're already aware of, let's talk about a few other matchups I think could be a lot of fun. And I'm going to go to another more recent character from the new trilogy, Rey. Yeah, I'm not going to call her Rey Skywalker, because that just seems weird, and I don't know. Ultimately, that's not important. Yes, I actually do like Rey a lot as a character. I know there's people who have issues with her, but I think at her core, in at least the first two movies, she had a lot of potential, and again, powered by a great performance. We haven't seen a lot of the comic books focused on her character outside of like the movie adaptations. So I'd like to see more of that universe because there's so much there to kind of untap. But again, like who would we partner Rey with? What would be a cool Marvel character that she could interact with? And my first thought is, Rey very much at her core is a fan, right? Like she came up, grown up as a fan of the Star Wars universe, very much like we did, hearing about these different characters, these different adventures, like living in an at things like that. Now, who's a character that kind of has those similar characteristics, that was once a fan but now is a hero in their own way? And that would go to Kamala Khan, Miss Marvel. Again, she was just a normal kid, just living in the world. She became an Inhuman, and now she's, again, a superhero, and I think a rising star within the Marvel universe. And recently, we're getting the Miss Marvel TV show that's coming out, so I think it would make a lot of sense to put these two characters together. You'd hit an audience that is much different than the audience for Mandalorian and Wolverine, but I think that it would be cool too, seeing these individuals that were, once fans, that had that kind of awestruck attitude towards this kind of adventure lifestyle, but now they're part of it, and seeing them share that bond. But I think what's also really cool about them, what could be a great story beat, is the fact that they have one major difference, and that's their family dynamic. Of course, Rey growing up alone with no parents, and Kamala Khan, like family is a big part of her character. Seeing them interact and having a conversation about that, how family has kind of informed who they are currently, or the lack thereof. I think you could also have like a great scene too, like a small, just personal moment where maybe Kamala Khan invites Rey over for dinner and they have a family feast with everyone. I think that could be very cool, just to give her the opportunity to experience that even vicariously, with someone else. I just think there's a lot of potential there to tell great stories. Again, seeing them having to deal with a lot of similar problems, a lot of the similar responsibility, but then focusing on those differences as well. It could lead to a very different story than some of the other ones, but I think maybe even one of the best ones. This is the one I think would be maybe the most interested in reading. And I didn't necessarily come up with like who would be the creative teams for this. I thought about doing that, but I don't necessarily know if I would be as well versed. I mean, my first thought would be like G. Willow Wilson, who's the writer of the original person who wrote Kamala Khan, and seeing her take on that world. But again, like she's not really writing a lot for Marvel at this time and place, so who knows? But I'd be curious to see what you thought of, like if you would link any of these writers, or if there are any other matchups outside of the ones I talk about. Let me know in the comment section below. But let's look at some other matchups, I keep saying matchups, but I guess I should say, pairings or whatever you want to have you. So let's go over to the next one, and I think this is one that you might enjoy as well. So with Miss Marvel and Rey, I thought you could really, the focus of that would be more of the emotional aspect of it, like seeing that family dynamic play out. So I thought to have someone that's on a completely other side of the spectrum, just something that'd be a lot of fun and just kind of wacky and goofy, but in a good way, like in a good way that you would see in the MCU or Star Wars, part of that humor that has made them as popular properties as they are now and have been for a very long time. So when you talk about goofy and fun, who else besides Rocket and Groot, right? I mean, I can't believe the fact we live in a world where these are popular characters. As someone who got into the comic like right when it was coming out again with the DNA run after Annihilation, never thinking they'd be like household names, but they are. So who would be a fun pair for Rocket and Groot? And I think, to me, that it's a very obvious but very fun answer. And that, of course, is Han and Chewie. I think, again, look at their dynamics with one another. They're very similar. You have the fast-talking, kind of brash person that's leading them with Rocket and Han, and then the characters who have a very limited or unique dialect. I mean, I think this alone would be a great opportunity to have a fantastic running joke with Groot and Chewbacca, like having them have a conversation with one another. As a writer, you'd be quite easy, because all you have to do is like write growls and I am Groot, but like have them be able to somehow communicate with one another. This would probably be an easier kind of matchup in a way, because again, both of these exist in space, so this is an easier, when it comes to how do they run into each other. They kind of just hang out in a bar, maybe. I think that'd be a great way to have them interact. They're in a bar, they get into a scrap, maybe Rocket Raccoon pushes Chewie by accident, and then it sets off them on some sort of crazy adventure. Maybe they're after the same bounty on something or the same prize. But I do think if you look at Groot and Rocket, a lot of their makeup, a lot of their back and forth, I think, is very much inspired by something like Han Solo and Chewie. So why not kind of build on that even further. So I just think this would be a fantastic good time, like, you know, having Han and Rocket argue who's going to actually be flying the Millennium Falcon, things like that. There's just a cool ideas here that could be fun. It wouldn't be as serious as some of the other things. I think if you went the serious route, it would be the exact wrong tone. Doing this little exercise, of course, can't include every Star Wars character. That would be impossible, but I did want to hit on some main ones, but there might be some that I missed. Don't worry, I'll probably maybe do future videos with similar ideas if people do tend to enjoy this. But I could not do this without including one of the most iconic Star Wars characters, arguably maybe the best Star Wars character, at least one of the most notable villains of all time in the world of movies, and that's Darth Vader. And, you know, there's probably been a lot of different fan ideas regarding who would you like to see Darth Vader go up against in the Marvel Universe. And I'm going to try to stick with hero and villain with this. So I was kind of focusing on what would be a fun villain. And there's probably a lot of villains people are shouting out that it's going to be different than the one I choose. But the reason I chose this one was because this villain, to me, goes back to what inspired the creation of Darth Vader. Right? When you look at Darth Vader, the idea of stormtroopers, clearly they were inspired by the idea of Nazi Germany and fascism. If you're going to have one fascist, it makes sense to match him up with another fascist in the world of Red Skull, one of the most evil characters in Marvel Universe. I mean, there's even a crossover in the Marvel DC Universe where Joker thought Red Skull was just too much for him. So who could you match him up with? And I think Darth Vader makes the most sense. Unlike the other matchups where he talked about how their personality traits are similar, here I think what's more interesting is how their ideologies match up, and not just in the sense of their universes, but how they were formed. Of course, Red Skull being a Nazi, and I think if you look at the creation of Sith, that what George Lucas did, I think you can definitely see that ideology was what inspired the Sith ideology. I mean, stormtroopers are stormtroopers for a reason. I don't think he's using that name lightly. I think it's clearly a pretty obvious metaphor. So why not take individuals that come from very similar worlds, despite being from different universes, and see what they do? You know, how would they interact? What would their thought process be? Would they get along in a weird way, or would they just fight because they ultimately just want to see one survive? And I think that was what makes this much more intriguing than maybe some of the other villains you could put with Darth Vader. I know there's probably people screaming other villains that they would want to match up Darth Vader with. I mean, there's plenty of people. I think there's really an endless amount of Marvel villains. Wouldn't make a lot of sense, but I just think the ideology standpoint of how they're similar and the way you can approach that would lead to the best story. One of the villains I'm sure a lot of people were thinking would be a better matchup for Darth Vader would be this villain of Doctor Doom. And I know seeing Doctor Doom and Darth Vader in the same comic would be kind of cool. I want to be against that. But I think there's actually a better villain to match up Victor Von Doom with, and that's Grand Admiral Thrawn. Thrawn got a bit of name recognition in the last season of The Mandalorian, and he's also been on the Rebels TV show, and clearly a lot of people adore him from his books in the expanded universe. He's been in some comics as well, so he may not have be as popular as Darth Vader, but character-wise, I think seeing him match up with Doctor Doom would be actually a better comic, a better story, especially the way that Thrawn likes to kind of utilize art to study and understand his enemies. So I like to see how he would approach Latveria in Doctor Doom. They have him and Doom have a much more strategic mind. Vader has elements of strategy, but let's be honest, part of what makes Vader who he is the fact that he's just a badass, will mow people down. Thrawn isn't necessarily that. He doesn't have the Force. He just has to use his brain, and he did something that not many other people could do, in the sense that he's a non-human that rose up the ranks of the Empire, which is unheard of. And again, Doctor Doom is just kind of a normal individual, has some magical powers, but is cunning and can outsmart pretty much anyone. I mean, he outsmarted Silver Surfer, for example. So who would win in that element of strategy? Who would have the upper hand? I think there's arguments made on both sides. You know, could Thrawn overtake the world of Latveria? Could Doctor Doom utilize magic, something that Thrawn would not be able to prepare for? I don't know. Imagine a conversation between these two, the amount of ego that would exist, it would just be bursting off the page. So that's why I think seeing Thrawn and seeing Darth Vader would be one hell of a story. Mentioned Thrawn was a name that was thrown about by Ahsoka Tano in the latest season of The Mandalorian, and I know seeing Ahsoka Tano in live action was something that many people didn't think would ever happen, and when it did, it kind of knocked it out of the park. Rosario Dawson was fantastic. Ahsoka Tano might be my favorite overall Star Wars character. She's certainly up there. Her and Rex, again, being a huge fan of the Clone Wars, and I think putting her as the main focus of the last season made a lot of sense. Those last few episodes of her and going against Darth Maul, I think are up there as maybe one of the best plain Star Wars movies if you were to kind of combine those episodes into one movie. And it was fantastic. And I think Disney clearly realizes what they have in that character, and they're going to probably put a lot of investment into it. And I think they also saw that eventually with a character like Black Widow. It just unfortunately took them a little longer to make her movie. But I think you combine these two female characters that we can never get enough of and put them together. There's a lot of cool things that could happen. I think, too, there's a lot of similar characteristics that could make their partnership fun. They are individuals that have to kind of work outside of the norm. Black Widow can be a part of the Avengers, but she's also that spy as well. And because of that, she's often kind of an outsider. You feel like she can always fit in. Her past and who she is doesn't necessarily make it easy for her to kind of blend in with the rest of the Avengers. And with Ahsoka Tano, she's had her issues with the Jedi Council. She's not really technically a Jedi based upon what happened, as she kind of was ousted for not necessarily something she did, and she decided to make a choice to leave. And now, as things progress, she in a way does become a spy. She becomes Fulcrum as part of the Rebels TV show, going against the Empire and being this leader, but maybe leading it in a different way. So, she has moral code that may not match up with all the similar Jedi, and she might go outside the norm, similar to Black Widow. So I just think that these are two characters that Marvel is realizing, both in Disney and Marvel, seeing that these are two female-led characters that are just as good as any of the male characters. Let's talk about more villains matching up with villains, because I think that could be even more fun, seeing like how these individuals can try to out evil one another, or the lengths they would go compared to like heroes who you think at the end of the day are going to at least kind of come together and find peace with one another. But a character like Kingpin, for example, who's this crime boss, who would be a cool Star Wars villain to see him go toe-to-toe with? Who would be someone that it would make a lot of sense, in the sense of you have this individual who rules New York City, clearly not at the galactic level, but if he were to do that, who would make the most sense? And I think, of course, that would have to be someone like Jabba the Hutt, right? I mean, they're both crime lords. They're both gigantic individuals in their own sense. They're two individuals with iron wills that you don't want to end up owing money, because it's going to cost you in the long run. It would also be cool with this matchup is that, Kingpin and Jabba the Hutt are not individuals that are going to take matters in their own hands in most cases. They're going to let somebody else do that. So what would that look like? Well, I think you take one of Kingpin's most notable and most successful assassins, and someone like Bullseye, and who is one of Jabba the Hutt's at least more successful individuals that he partners with, and Boba Fett. Having Boba Fett trying to take out Kingpin, and Kingpin responding by utilizing Bullseye, and have Bullseye and Boba Fett going toe-to-toe. And again, could be cool to see. Again, how would it happen? Would it make sense? Probably not, but none of this stuff would make sense. Nothing makes sense, nothing matters. It's just about having fun, and I think that ultimately is the point at the end of the day. One character I wanted to include in this was Black Panther, but I was kind of racking my brain, like, who would I match up Black Panther with? It's kind of fun, too, because we had the recent Ta-Nehisi Coates run where you have Black Panther in space, which does, in a way, feel like Star Wars, because he's, like, fighting in spaceships, and I guess, again, having a transition over to the fact that he would be in the Star Wars universe wouldn't be all that difficult. But who would you have a match up with? Well, when you look at Black Panther, right, he's as much of a diplomat as he is a superhero. He's a soldier, but he also has to lead a country. And I think it would make sense then to match him up with someone like a Jedi, especially a Jedi during kind of the Clone Wars era, where you're both a soldier or general as well as a diplomat with these different planets, trying to do a multitude of jobs. And I think it would make the most sense to have him team up with someone like General Obi-Wan Kenobi. Yes, Mr. Hello there himself. Kenobi is a bit a detective, and so is Black Panther. Having them kind of land on a planet together and figure out what exactly is going on. Maybe there's a certain planet with needing assistance or something bad happened. They need to determine what happened and then find a solution. As simple as that. But if there's anyone that could go toe to toe with the Star Wars universe utilizing technology, it would be someone Black Panther with vibranium and all the other gadgets they have. I mean, could his suit propel something like a lightsaber? I mean, that's something you could look at. This is not necessarily a matchup that is as obvious as some of the others, but I think that's also what's kind of cool about it too, because there's not necessarily a lot of similarities in the sense of these are very two different individuals, but they do I think share leadership-wise similar characteristics, the way they approach issues, and again thinking outside the box and trying to think of both the benefit of the whole as well as the individual. And although necessarily they have different ideologies, I think there's a lot of similar ideologies between what Black Panther believes and what the Jedis believe too. Because Black Panther would do things that other superheroes won't, because he has to, because he's a king. And I think Kenobi is very, very similar to that, as well as he'll break certain rules in the Jedi Council, I think in large part due to the fact that who was his master, but he'll do what is necessarily right when he has to, and if that includes hanging out at a desert planet until a kid can grow up, he'll do that too. It would be fun just to see Black Panther show up in like the Galactic Senate or something like that, and have him have some sort of interaction with other individuals in the Star Wars universe on more of a political side as well. So again, a very different story than some of the others, but I think that approach is what makes it unique. All right, one last grouping. I hope you enjoy this random idea that I've been throwing out there. I just thought it'd be kind of fun. And again, when I talked about it, there's certain characters I have to include within this if I ever do this again. And I had Darth Vader, so I of course have to have Luke Skywalker. I mean, Luke Skywalker was the main character arguably in the first trilogy. I think you'd have to agree to that. So you have to include him here. But who's someone you would match up with Luke Skywalker? Are one of the maybe more popular characters in the Star Wars universe? So would you then match him up with a very popular character in the Marvel universe like Spider-Man? I mean, Spider-Man is probably Marvel's most popular character. That makes sense, but I think it's not that Spider-Man, but the other Spider-Man in Miles Morales, because I think what Miles Morales shares with Luke Skywalker is understanding the burden of legacy, right? Where Luke Skywalker is dealing with the fact that his father, of course, is Darth Vader, and Miles Morales also has to deal with the fact that he has the legacy of the Spider-Man name that he has to carry as well. And also, he too has dealt with the fact that some of his family members have maybe not been as clean cut. No, his dad's not Darth Vader. He said dad's not a dude who's going to force choke individuals to death, but he's had uncles and other individuals that have lived different types of lifestyles. But I think ultimately what would be the best focus is that idea of legacy, where you have Miles Morales trying to live up to what Spider-Man people expect from the world of Spider-Man, and now Luke Skywalker has to do something similar with the fact that Skywalker name brings a lot to it. And now he knows. I think, of course, it would make the most sense to have this take place potentially like in between Jedi and Empire in some way. Again, I don't think continuity matters. My hope is that all these take outside of continuity. They're just their own thing, maybe in their own universe, and they wouldn't impact the actual real life continuity in any way. So this is that you have more the old school fan that would be the Skywalker fan, with more the new age fan that is the Miles Morales fan, and one of that generational divide. It's more of the the outsider rather than the characters themselves. How could that impact the way that you approach the characters? And then two, thinking of something how the spider sense and the Force would relate with one another. I think it'd also be a different role for someone like Luke Skywalker in a way where most of the movie he is the young kid, right? Where Han Solo calling him kid. Here where he would be in more of a leadership role, you would think, is he would have a little bit more experience than Miles Morales potentially, and kind of leading into the person he would eventually become. So I think that this, to me, of all the different matchups, was the one that I'm the most interested in, because again, it's not necessarily as obvious, but there's a lot of key similarities. But I think what really makes them much more appealing of a combination is what makes them very different, especially the way that they represent two very different fandoms and two very different times, compared to when Luke Skywalker was created and compared to now when Miles Morales was created. And seeing those worlds combine, I think, would lead to some pretty quality storytelling. Anyways, those were all the different combinations that I came up with, and seeing the Marvel and Star Wars universe combined. Again, I don't think this is anything, if they ever doing it, that have to exist within the continuity. Just these fun one-offs, right? I mean, comics can be fun as well, and why not utilize the comic book form to do things that you would never be able to do in movies or even like a cartoon series? That to me just makes a lot of sense. Again, if they never ever would make anything like this, I wouldn't begrudge them, but I just think it'd be kind of fun. I mean, if it's right there and you have the opportunity to do it, why not? Why not maybe give it one shot? We'll see. But what would you think of this? Would you be for this type of thing, against this type of thing? I think there's probably a differing opinion on for many people. Are there different ideas that you would like to see? Other characters you think would be kind of fun seeing the matchup for the Marvel and Star Wars universe? I'm sure there's plenty of examples. I mean, they're pretty expansive universes with so many characters that just keep growing. Let me know in the comment sections below. I hope I don't make any Star Wars purists all that angry, but I think that's sometimes unavoidable. Just remember, though, at the end of the day, that comics are for everyone. The key is finding the right one. Until next time, keep reading.